Welcome to this explainer on the predictable irrationality of the consumer. We're actually going to skip the standard introduction today because I want to immediately turn you, the audience, into test subjects in our very own behavioral science lab. Get ready because we're about to test how your mind really works when it comes to making decisions. So I want you to participate in a super simple exercise right now. It's the exact same exercise that Professor Martin Schleicher recently ran with his students to kick off his seminar on consumer psychology. Are you ready? Quickly, in your head, pick a completely random number between 1 and 4. Got it? Okay, if you're like the vast majority of people across different countries and cultures, you probably just picked the number 3. It's crazy, right? Notice the massive spike on the number 3 in Professor Schleicher's data. Over 40% of people choose 3, followed closely by 2. Almost no one ever picks 1 or 4. And why is that? Well, because the human brain naturally avoids extremes. We just instinctively shy away from the edges. We think we're making a random choice, but we aren't. We rely on hidden, predictable rules rather than true randomness. And the uncomfortable truth for classical economics is this. If consumers can't even pick a simple number at random, there is absolutely no such thing as a random, irrational choice in the supermarket aisle. We always need a reason, even if we just make it up on the spot. Section 1. The mind's shortcuts. Since we can't make truly random choices, let's dive into the mental shortcuts our brains constantly rely on to survive daily information overload. In behavioral science, these shortcuts are called heuristics. Think of them as your brain's autopilot. They're short, alternative paths our minds use to make decisions quickly and efficiently. And most of the time, they work great. But here's the catch. To get that speed, we trade accuracy. And that trade-off leads to predictable, systematic errors in our judgment. Let's look at a few fascinating examples of these heuristics in action. First up is the representativeness heuristic. Picture a guy named Pedro. Pedro is shy, introverted, helpful but unsociable, and very detail-oriented. Now, statistically speaking, what is Pedro's most likely profession? A commercial airline pilot, a farmer, or a librarian? Your intuition probably screams librarian because his personality perfectly matches our mental prototype of one. But statistically, Pedro is far more likely to be a farmer simply because there are vastly more farmers in the world than there are librarians. Our brains totally ignore the math and just go with the stereotype. Then we have the availability heuristic. This is where we judge the probability of an event by how easily we can recall it from memory. For instance, what do you think is more likely to kill you? A spectacular shark attack or being hit by falling airplane parts? Most people are terrified of the shark, but the data proves that dying from falling airplane parts is actually 30 times more likely. We get this wrong because shark attacks are heavily reported in the media. They're dramatic, so they're readily available in our minds, hijacking our sense of true risk. And this brilliantly illustrates the power of anchoring. When making estimates, we rely way too heavily on the very first piece of information we receive, even if it's completely irrelevant. In one experiment, students were asked for the last 2 digits of their passport, a literally random number. Yet those with higher passport numbers were suddenly willing to pay significantly more money for random household items. Or consider estimating BMW sales. Exposing someone to a low anchor first drags their estimate way down, while a high anchor pulls their guess up by massive percentages. We drop an anchor and we just fail to adjust sufficiently. Section 2. The pain of losing. Now that we see how our brains take shortcuts, let's look at what happens when our wallets are on the line. Imagine you're walking down the street and boom, you find a crisp $100 bill. You feel great, right? Now imagine instead that you reach into your pocket and realize you just lost a $100 bill. That sudden drop in your stomach, that sting, is far more intense than the fleeting joy of finding the money. Human beings are fundamentally wired to avoid losses at all costs. The bad simply outweighs the good. So the crucial point is the actual math behind this emotion. Behavioral economists have proven that the psychological sting of a loss is mathematically twice as powerful as the joy of an equivalent gain. In academic terms, this coefficient is called lambda, and it usually equals 2. But when Professor Schleicher ran this test on his students with a gambling scenario, their average was over 3. They were so deeply averse to losing that they demanded massive potential payouts just to risk a tiny amount of money. Let's move to the casino and see how this builds into even riskier behavior, known as the gambler's fallacy. Imagine you're at a roulette table, and the ball has landed on black 5 times in a row. What do you bet on next? In the professor's data, a massive 70% of people immediately switched to betting on red. They assumed the odds had to balance out. But guys, the wheel has no memory. The odds are exactly the same on every single spin. Even worse, when people try to bet against the streak to recover an expected balance, they irrationally flip their choices and actually bet more money, driving their potential losses even higher. Section 3. The paradox of choice. Let's shift away from the casino and walk into your local supermarket aisle. You might think that, as a consumer, you want as many options as possible. Now, what's really interesting about this famous jam experiment is how it entirely shatters that assumption. Researchers set up a tasting booth in a grocery store. On one day, they offered 24 flavors of jam. On another, only 6. The massive 24-flavor display successfully attracted way more shoppers to stop and look. But when it came time to actually buy, offering 24 options completely paralyzed the consumers. Barely anyone bought anything. But when presented with just 6 options, sales skyrocketed by 10 times. Too much choice doesn't empower us. It overloads our mental shortcuts and destroys our ability to make a decision. Section 4. The power of context. This brings us to our final and perhaps most powerful concept about how the framing of information dictates value. Check out these 2 scenarios. A pair of shoes sitting alone with a $100 price tag? No one really cares. But take the exact same pair of $100 shoes and put a big red tag above them that says $200 crossed out. Suddenly, there is a riot to buy them. By simply establishing a $200 reference point, the context has completely transformed how the buyer feels. The exact same price tag suddenly feels like an unmissable bargain. The reference point is the ultimate design variable. And this framing effect doesn't just sell shoes, it changes life or death decisions. In a famous study, patients were told about a risky surgery. Group A was told, out of 100 patients, 90 live past 5 years. Most chose the surgery. Group B was told, out of 100 patients, 10 die within 5 years. Look closely, that is the exact same statistic. Yet by simply framing the data around death and loss, a massive number of patients suddenly rejected the surgery. Our brains react to the frame, not the underlying facts. You are experiencing this choice architecture every single day. Think about your morning coffee run. You usually see 3 cup sizes. Very few people buy the smallest, and the largest seems a bit too expensive. The options are purposefully structured to make the middle option feel like a safe, reasonable compromise. The exact same thing happens at the supermarket. The cheap store brand is on the bottom shelf, the super expensive imported brand is up on top, and the national brand is right in the middle, perfectly at eye level. Those extreme options exist purely as decoys to nudge you into happily buying the middle product. Businesses and governments use this everywhere. For example, countries that set organ donation as an automatic opt-out default see massively higher participation rates simply because of how the choice is presented. It even affects mental accounting. We will carelessly gamble away a $10 casino chip because our brains categorize it totally differently than a crisp $10 bill in our wallet. From failing to pick a random number, to fearing loss more than we enjoy a gain, to being effortlessly manipulated by a crossed-out price tag, our minds are incredibly predictably irrational. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought. Tomorrow, when you buy your coffee, or choose a product off a shelf, or make a major financial decision, take a step back and ask yourself, are you truly in control of your daily choices, or is the hidden architecture of the context deciding for you? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this changes how you see the world of choice.